Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. You may not have heard, but there is now a version 4 of the Miyoo Mini, and they've been released in small batches on the Miyoo AliExpress store. Now, I was lucky enough to pick up one of these a few weeks ago, and so in this video we're going to review the version 4 Miyoo Mini and see what's changed and what hasn't. And right off the bat, it looks like the packaging is 100% the same as it always was. So you're going to get an SD card, an adapter, as well as a USB charging cable. And probably the biggest change is we have a new yellow colorway. This is the 5th color that they've now released. I think it looks pretty good. It is a deep yellow with a little bit of a red tint. I also like the fact that every button on here is black to give it a nice kind of bumblebee look. Now, other than the color, it doesn't seem like there's any physical difference. For example, the texture of the plastic is still very bumpy and grippy. In terms of controls, these also are still using a rubber membrane connection that has a very light touch to it. So if you do like that lighter and softer feel of the Miyoo Mini and Miyoo Mini Plus, this is exactly the same. And other than the color, the biggest physical difference that we have here is the screen resolution. This one is now 750 by 560. We'll talk about this more in depth when we actually turn it on. Anyway, as far as I can tell, those are the only difference when it comes to hardware components, at least externally. So if you weren't a fan of the shoulder buttons on the original Miyoo Mini, you thought they were too flush, then yes, that is still the same experience. But for my part, I've never really had a problem with the shoulder buttons, mostly because I don't really play shoulder button style games with this particular handheld. Instead, I mostly use it to assign hotkeys, and so in that regard, it works just fine. And the back buttons are very light to the touch, much like how it was on the original Miyoo Mini version 3. It also looks like the battery is the same, still 2000 mAh with the same label. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, this is exactly the same like the other Miyoo Minis that you may have seen in other videos I've released previously. It's still a very small and very pocketable handheld, which is probably one of its main draws. Next, I want to take a look at the SD card that comes with the device. And right off the bat, I did notice that the default language is actually in Chinese. No worries, this is actually pretty easy to change. We're going to go all the way to the far right to the settings cog, and then we'll navigate down to that little globe icon. Within here, you can find a variety of different language options, and obviously I'm going to pick English. Now, it's been a while since I tried a stock SD card on the Miyoo Mini, but the process is very simple. You can go into the games section, find your different systems, and then you can browse the games within. Now, the card that I was sent from the AliExpress store did come preloaded with a bunch of games. However, it does fall into the same trap that you see with a lot of these other preloaded systems. For example, the games themselves are not in alphabetical order. Instead, they put a bunch of numbers in front of the names. And I find this to be pretty annoying because instead of going to the letter of the game I want to play, I've got to memorize whatever number it's been assigned. Either way, that's a quick look at the stock experience. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here just because we have lots of other options. Now for a quick comparison, here's an older Miyoo Mini. This is a version 2 model right here. This one's been through the ringer. For example, you can see it's got a little crack on the right side because I dropped it one time. And I've also added a couple custom stickers here on the back just to make it look a little bit prettier. Anyway, from a physical standpoint, yes, this feels exactly the same as the yellow one that we're looking at today. So what I'm going to do is grab the card for my black Miyoo Mini and put it in the yellow one. And here we're running OnionOS, which is a custom firmware built for the Miyoo Mini. This one is very similar to the stock operating experience, but just tweaked to perfection. And I've done a bunch of videos and guides about OnionOS in case you are interested in checking it out. Either way, as you can see, OnionOS is working just fine on this version 4 of the Miyoo Mini. Now, earlier I mentioned there was no hardware difference externally between these two Miyoo Minis. However, there are some things that are different internally. For example, all the Miyoo Mini models will not charge from a USB-C power delivery port. So if you wanted to use a more modern charging plug, it's not going to work. Now, thankfully, that's actually something they fixed with the version 4. I tried a bunch of different plugs and wattages, and all of them seemed to charge the device with absolutely no issue. So if that is something that annoyed you about the previous model, this has now been fixed. In fact, this actually makes it more compatible with power delivery standards than some other handhelds on the market, including the Anbernic RG35XX, as well as the Miyoo Mini Plus. These also have the same issue where they cannot be charged from a power delivery port. So I think that's a pretty cool upgrade and something that Miyoo really didn't have to do, but I'm glad they did it. Now, as I started playing the device, I noticed one thing right up front, and that is that the screen looks a little bit off on the version 4. As you may notice, this screen has a little bit of a blue or greenish tint to it, and this seems a lot worse than I remember with the other Miyoo Minis. Now, thankfully, within the software, you are able to change some display parameters, and these settings right here are what some community members have been recommending for the version 4 screen. And sure enough, when I try those parameters, it does improve the screen quite a bit. You can see now that the colors just pop a little bit more and it doesn't look quite so washed out. I still think the tint is just a little bit off, but I don't think it's that bad. So here's a quick look side by side between the default settings here on the left and then those community upgraded standards on the right. And also bear in mind that not all Miyoo Mini screens are the same, and so you may not have this issue, or you may have to try different parameters to make it look good. Either way, with these fixes, I think it's better, but not quite perfect. So let's do a couple comparisons against other devices. We'll start with my version 2 Miyoo Mini on the right. And right off the bat, I can see that the saturation levels are pretty similar, but some of the more red objects like the Charizard on the screen just looks a little too orange. Not only that, the yellow feels a little bit blown out, and the blue doesn't have that nice deep coloring either. And for reference, the Miyoo Mini version 2 on the right is at default settings. Up next is the Miyoo Mini Plus, again with the settings set to default. Here I found that the colors are more subdued on the right, but the colors do seem more accurate. Again with the Charizard, it looks like a more proper red compared to the one on the left. Not only that, but the shadows within Charizard's wing are a little bit darker and just more impressive as a result. And finally, we have the Anbernic RG35XX. This one also looks like it's a little bit skewed towards yellow in terms of color temperature, but again, I would say that the red, yellow, and blue are more accurately presented. So when it comes down to it, I would say that the version 4 Miyoo Mini has probably the least accurate colors, and it's also very difficult to dial in those saturation levels too. Now, in addition to the coloring issues, there's another issue with the Miyoo Mini version 4 screen. And that has to do with the resolution. Like I mentioned before, it is 750 by 560. And generally, when you have a higher resolution display, that actually improves the quality of the image. However, unfortunately, the Miyoo firmware does not accommodate for that larger resolution display. Instead, what's happening is it's pushing out a 480p resolution despite the fact that we have more pixels to work with. So instead of pushing to the full 560p resolution, we're getting 480p blown up to 560p. And the result is the opposite of what you would like. Instead of it being sharper and clearer, it actually gets fuzzier, because we are enlarging those 480p pixels. And so in the side-by-side comparison between the version 2 on the right, you can see that the 480p version is actually sharper. And unfortunately, all of this is locked behind the firmware, which is not accessible by community developers. So unless Miyoo themselves updates the firmware to accommodate the 560p resolution, the version 4 of the Miyoo Mini is actually fuzzier than the 480p versions. And unfortunately, things like integer scaling won't even work, because again, the screen thinks it's 480p and then hardware scaling it up to 560. Now that being said, it's a pretty subtle difference, so if you've never tried a Miyoo Mini before, you probably won't notice. But it is kind of a bummer that those really sharp pixels, which are what people really loved about the Miyoo Mini, are no longer present on the version 4. Now before making this video, I sat down with the Miyoo Mini for a few days and just kind of tested it here and there. And admittedly, it's been a while since I played a Miyoo Mini. These devices are so fragile that I'm kind of worried about playing with them, and so because of that, they kind of sit on a shelf. And in my few days of testing with the version 4 Miyoo Mini, I had one surprising revelation, and that is that this device felt a lot less comfortable than I remember it even 6 months ago. In fact, the whole experience was a lot more cramped than I was expecting. And I think a lot of that has to do with the release of bigger devices like the Miyoo Mini Plus and the Anbernic RG35XX. These devices are quite a bit bigger than the original Miyoo Mini, but that added size does come with a lot of benefits. Number one, we've got a 3.5-inch screen, which looks very impressive on devices as small as these. And thanks to that larger size, it's more comfortable to hold. And so the revelation I had while testing the original version 4 of the Miyoo Mini was that I would rather play on an Anbernic RG35XX or a Miyoo Mini Plus. And if you have any questions about these two devices, I did a full comparison between the two. I'll leave that link down below. So when it came down to it, when I first started testing the Miyoo Mini version 4, I walked away with a completely different conclusion than I was expecting. When I first got the device, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about how amazing the original Miyoo Mini was. And I still think that for what it does, it's a pretty awesome piece of tech. However, given the screen issues that we're having with this particular version, and the fact that it's just not very comfortable anymore, it really leads me to believe that the Miyoo Mini Plus and the RG35XX have really taken over. These two devices are definitely less pocketable than the original Miyoo Mini, but still quite pocketable on their own. And we've got a ton of additional benefits, including Wi-Fi on the Miyoo Mini Plus and HDMI out on the 35XX. So when it comes down to it, I still love the form factor and size of the Miyoo Mini. And I know there's a lot of people out there who've been wanting to get their hands on one of these devices. And the good news is that yes, Miyoo is manufacturing more of these little handhelds, and so if you are quick on the uptake, you might be able to snag one from their store. However, all things considered, I'm not willing to say that it's actually going to be worth that amount of effort. Because for me, I've effectively replaced the Miyoo Mini with the Miyoo Mini Plus and the RG35XX. These devices have a lot of things going for them. They're a lot sturdier and have bigger batteries and bigger screens. And so if you are in the market for a more budget-minded vertical handheld that is very simple and can play up to PlayStation 1, I no longer think that picking up either of these devices feels like settling. Instead, they've just kind of naturally overtaken the original Miyoo Mini. So in conclusion, I'm happy that Miyoo is now releasing a new version of the Miyoo Mini, and playing with these devices over the past couple years has been a lot of fun. However, if you've been feeling a little bit of FOMO about not picking up one of these smaller devices, I don't think you really have to worry about it. As it stands, the version 4 of the Miyoo Mini feels like a step down from the version 2 and version 3. And just about any day of the week, if I had to pick a vertical handheld to just grab and have on the go, I likely will not be picking the Miyoo Mini version 4. Instead, I will be using my Miyoo Mini Plus or the RG35XX. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you have a version 4 and do you like it, or are you trying to get your hands on one? Or on the other side, do you have one of these larger devices and do you prefer those? As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.